I saw a white, bright skeleton key. There was a not bright, white fog of cloud layer that covered the ground. And later on, I saw large whorls of color. And I felt the tingling euphoria wipe down me. And yet, it does again, as I say this for the third time. But during the first time, and fading now, was a smell of marigolds, or frangipani, something like that. And it was like there were colored specks, like tiny little specks of lint everywhere. A great thing about this is that it contains illustrations by Aleister Crowley and others that I have not seen anywhere else, even posts on the internet. And these illustrations may have hidden meaning on purpose, or perhaps you may get more meaning and purpose out of it than is stated, right? Frater Balarion continues his The Sword and the State. And it's important to realize that you can't legislate morality. And I would differentiate very strongly between emotions, feelings, thoughts, and the beliefs and deeds around them. Certainly, certain religious communities, just like the me system, should be allowed their own personally operated rules that they enforce within themselves. But I wouldn't say that a state should allow all the death penalties and stuff in the Bible just because you have a Christian community, so the Christians kill each other for a lot of stuff, right? Or the Jews, or whatever. So that's not quite it. In some states, they don't really pry. As long as it's a private matter, even vice that does have a physical effect on the world is not supposed to be spied upon. And the Constitutional Republic of Iran has violated this at times, but the Wiccan people and other people that are permitted generally go off and do their thing. And the more recognized people, again, they go off and do their thing. Purim is said to be quite wild in Iran, but, they want you to be disciplined about it too, right? And some of these restrictions could come from an imbalance. I wouldn't say that the imbalance is some patriarchal monotheism, because Christianity isn't monotheism. You can't have a trinity. You can't have 2 in 1 or 2 separate or 3 separate, or however you're going to define that. You can't have Godhead and saints and angels that you pray to, or whatever version of Christianity. It's obviously not monotheism. Patriarchal, it's like all societies are patriarchal unless you remove the males from them, and then maybe you can have something else. But there really wasn't a matriarchal society. You see special roles for the grandmother or something like this of the tribe or something like that, but you don't actually. It really sets itself up as patriarchy. So that's not really it. But the chauvinistic versus the feministic sort of thing, there's obviously going to be problems on both ends. But some of these rules, just like even the atheist state, well, I mean, the officially atheist state would realize that there's maybe problems with free love, or that they don't have the effect if they don't control some of these things. Now, in my country, and maybe since all this was put, all sorts of statute laws have been put on sex and even drugs that wasn't there before. Sure, they legalized marijuana, and they're releasing people a lot more, a lot quicker about the drugs, but have they really fixed the thing? It's really about, the treatment system. So they're serving the treatment system instead of the jail system, and the people spend their lives on drugs, but they're the official drugs, right? So that's not really the answer either. But when you misdirect things, then you can have a lot more effect on controlling people. And so secular or sacred, that seems to be a lot of what happened, is the sublimation of things elsewhere, or the criminalization of minorities rather than actual issues. Now, there's been way too much of that nonsense of taking that the wrong way in my country since 2013. I mean, it was really big in 2020, but you know what I mean. It wasn't, but there was real crime and real violence and stuff that was being addressed. It wasn't, persecution of one. Right? You can look at that stuff and find out that if you look at statistics and policies combined, then you don't get the picture. If you compare, like, black people from a different country, then you don't get the same issue. And their children and their grandchildren. It's like, if it was really racial prejudice, you wouldn't find those differences in statistics. And, but anyways, the minorities as far as lifestyle and behavior, and it's like, as far as your lifestyle, again, if it's your own thing and you aren't forcing it on others, like a lot of people get very angry, it's, oh, you won't confirm. It's like, you don't have to confirm it. If it's good enough for you, it's good enough. You should be self-content about it, right? Volume 6.2 is the winter solstice, and we see sort of drawing down the moon sort of thing of, I guess, a Near Eastern priest, probably a representation of a Sabian at altar using the astronomic observation. The Zoroastrians, as they're called, had communities as far as that. So what the origin of what's meant by the Sabians, that varies. It could be people going from one to another, so the people picking and choosing their religions. That's probably one of the most important references you can think if you look at that reference, because so many people now don't have one religion, they have bits of religion, so therefore the people with bits of religion, and going from here to there, that would stand. But the Majus and the Sabian also can apply to the Zoroastrian communities. One more ritual oriented, the other more, well, I mean, one formally ritual oriented and the other concept and observation oriented, but they can still be in the same thing. I don't know if that's the best way to define the difference, right? And okay, not Jack Parsons. Who was I thinking? Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant says something along the lines of that formal ritual, the age of it's gone. Well, I think more than ever that people are lost. I see these Christian books about prayer and stuff like this, and it's like, it's obvious that something is lost, but, the idea that you better show up and all that stuff, or, they enforce it the state, that's not true. The idea that you just go through the ritual, again, that's not the case. And some new forms, like his cinematic magic, a lot of it, there's some stuff in his films that, uh, basically prepare for nudity, and I'm not sure what constitutes artistic nudity or whatever. I guess that's supposed to be because he include it for symbolic reasons or just for the sight of it. I'm not entirely sure. So the opening illustration does refer to the cult of Haran, and yeah, the stellar stuff, a lot of it goes way back. Some people say the Yazidi. You probably should look at the Yazidi, right? Because the Yazidi actually go much, much further back than we say. They have the oldest running religious calendar, and they have reference to stuff much older than that. That's just the current cycle that they're looking at. And we can look at the Arabian Nights as representing folklore. One of the most important uses of the Bible, for example, is its source of folklore and formulas and stuff. It's at the very least very representative. Some sources of fiction, like the Necronomicon, it's like we know that's not really an accurate reconstruction, but it represents something. There's a lot of stuff that represents something, so we should distinguish between mere mythology. Mere fiction and mythology, fables. They're three different things. I messed up for a second because most people don't use the word myth right. The Bible uses the word myth, and people don't even believe in the biblical use of the word myth. Myth is not, some made up whatever. It's something with meaning and purpose. It could be totally true. One of that aspects of the Sapien thing is, one, you can connect it to some of the origins of the Kabbalah through Sufism. And another thing you can look is that the working together, the lower order and the higher order working together. In the Islamic idea, there's the revealed and inspired book, and you have the book of yourself and the book of nature, and the only sin and disbelief is the fracturing of these, the abrogation between these when they don't all agree, right? Parzival and the Grail tradition, again, could be supplemented stuff, right? But Wolfram von Eschenbach was not traditionally taught, you could say, and some people at the time criticized his language use, but you could say it was encoding myth in what was presented as, well, what some people would take as, a fable. And perhaps the language issues, some of them are because of the non-traditional way about it. It's supposed to have some sort of effect. One of the things about it is the mixing of real-world application and having a spiritual life that combines the two. And that's part of the reason why the Grail legends have so remained, is because they're stories of people who built themselves up in the spiritual and material worlds by developing skills and that sort of stuff. And that being said, some people had worldly obligations and stuff that kept them from living as much of a launch life. And there's a mixing or interpreting of the tree of life from the Kabbalah into the channels of the vital air in yoga. The middle pillar or the golden dawn, some will say, oh, that's not as advanced, but they didn't really intend to make it anything other than working out Kabbalistic material. So they weren't intending to mix the East and the West per se. So they worked out the Church of Hermetic Sciences, the Ordo Templi Astartes, they worked out a joules system. And so different formulas are used. It's not an utter blend of where you wouldn't know what's what. And so there's a chart of which symbols to use and, the various attributes, the entities, and that sort of stuff. We've talked about that elsewhere. Crowley made an illustration of the first degree. Of course, you're introduced, you got your person doing things by the book. I don't really know because it's an illustration, but it's, there's layouts. Setting up a scene is important. Nowadays, it tends to be more on the line of guided meditations. I was initiated into an organization, and they have you shut your eyes, but they pull a book out of the table or their bag or whatever, and you hear also that there's a book, and they're choosing something off the list, or they're mixing something from here's a bunch of sounds, mix a couple things together and tell them it's their secret word. And so when things are brought out in the light, it doesn't really have its effect. And one of the things talked about earlier in this is something about how effective these things can be, and how much more effective when people took the myths literally. Now, some myths I do think you can take literally, but you need to not believe everything that way. When it comes to cosmological claims, not all ways are equal. When it comes to pedagogical ways, all ways are not equal. When it comes to mystical, all ways are not equal. When it comes to social, again, all ways are not equal. Not everything's equal. But the idea that you allow people to be what they're going to be, right? As the Quran says, there's no force in acceptance of a system of judgment. The word's broader than religion. We need to consider the modern science rather than the regressive movement that's like, science is, it's like, no, science is amoral. Before the idea of physical attacks by vampires became dominant, it was more of a psychic thing. But either way, people were fed on, attached to by certain things. And, there's ways of dealing with that. And, of course, finding the attributes to deal with that. Just like at some point in this book, I may gloss over it, something about, you find somebody's astrological chart, and you can use the symbolism of that to direct or to put the lesson of someone's issues in that. Volume 7, number 1, the Spring Equinox, 1978. Oh, I mean the fall, winter. Okay. Well, anyways, the person on the front seems to be a Babylonian offering his burnt offerings, and the celestial is presenced. Because the Ordo Templi Astartes was specialized, you could say, and focused a lot on the Goetia, there was reason why it might be best not to require that for people to be involved in the Church of the Hermetic Sciences. And so that was lifted, and 14 people got initiated on those after that requirement had been lifted. The trisecting the pentagram stuff makes me think of what I've seen with the which card? The Ace of Discs and the Order of Nine Angles symbol and stuff like this. There's a lot of symbols that you can kind of unfold and do geometric things with them. And yes, the flat pentagram, but lifting it up and doing stuff with it. I do think I may have seen some stuff in that article here first before seeing it anywhere else. And I'm not sure I've seen it as detailed anywhere else. Now, the meaning of all the angles I've seen more detailed elsewhere, but the actual mathematics of it, I think this is at the top. Certain things make certain experiences more common, but it's not exactly automatic. Now, I can produce certain feelings with certain sounds and stuff, but it's not like I flip a switch and that's there. And certainly other things happen too. So some people have the abilities come easy, some people not, but the point is to develop yourself along the way. The most important idea behind freedom is probably inherent equality. Now, some people will not choose to live up to what they need to live up to or what they could live up to, and then they, by that nature, won't be equal, but per se, an opportunity that rewards those who do well or don't do certain things, right? Or at least doesn't punish them for what is not their fault. And they had a magical alphabet. They, of course, started with an idea of Hebrew, as it's called, biblical Hebrew, and put a bunch of colors and stuff to it. And then we get into talk about Kabbalah, but it's games to develop oneself. And a lot of this magical stuff starts with study, memorization, and all that sort of stuff. Then it ends up being, okay, you're doing rituals. And then, okay, how's this going to apply to the rest of my life? That's why, for example, in the Islamic world, one of the things that they tell you is that if your ritual prayers are sound, then the rest of your life is sound, ultimately. Now, what does that mean, though? It means just like that, is you got the story that you enact or the art of the religion through the ritual and all that stuff. But if it's sound, there's that inner thing. So there's that science. And then your experience of it is of course, the... so, again, in Kabbalah, that would be the mother, father, child. The OTA has changed the tarot deck that they were working on, but they did use one that had a male version and a female version of the universe card. Kind of berserker shamanistic sort of stuff going on there. Warrior at the same time. But they're called the priestess and the magus.